Imagine the usual things you'd find in old, derelict buildings. Dust, pigeon feathers, and rusted lead pipes. And this hole that gets into your bones. But the mill wasn't cold. It was warm. Not warm like eating, warm like breath. The first day I walked in, the door stuck, swollen with years of damp. And when it finally gave way, the air hit me like I walked into a sleeping animal's den, heavy, humid, expectant. I stopped just inside the threshold, letting my eyes adjust. The mill was huge, a cavern of brick and shadow. Sunlight leaked through broken windows in thin, diagonal stripes, catching swirls of dust in its beams. The dust didn't fall naturally, not like normal dust. It moved as if stirred from beneath, as though the building itself had exhaled. I remember laughing under my breath. Old buildings creak, that's all. They hold heat in weird places. It's nothing, but then I felt something else. A pressure. Presence, not threatening, more like someone noticing me back. I walked deeper inside and the floor was uneven, patched concrete, oil stains, the ghost old machine line still visible. In the center of the room, heavy looms sat like prehistoric skeletons, bottled down dinosaurs. You could almost hear them even in silence, the heartbeat of industry. I put my hand on one of the machines, cold metal under my arm, and a thought came uninvited. It wasn't hanging limp, it was cold taut, as though it was leading somewhere. And I pulled gently, and it didn't break. Instead, the thread lifted towards me. My rational brain was trying to catalogue it. Some sort of installation, moss, cobweb. My body reacted before fall. My hand trembled, my breath caught. It felt warm. Warm like skin. I held the thread between my fingers, and the sound of the mill faded. No creaks, no distant cars, no wind, only a low hum. And then, as clearly as someone had whispered beside me, a voice. And that voice wasn't mine. I dropped the thread. It didn't fall, it hung in the air, suspended as though waiting for me. And that was the moment I understood this wasn't just fabric, it was memory. And it had been growing in the dark all this time. The mills are sleeping giants, slumped in Pendle's wind, boned and silent, ribbed with steel, their windows half blinded, for 50 years, dust. Inside, the light moves slowly, grain by grain. It settles over flywheels and belt pulleys, tucking them in flywheels. Every wall keeps secrets, rust caught in nail heads, the oil dark sweat of machine hands and cotton lint snowing into lungs, and the breath of workers rising like a prayer. there. Thread paths o'er the floorboards, grooves worn smooth by roots never walked without ever looking down. Grandmother pressed her thumb against the shuttle's edge so many times the wood remembers her shape. At lunch, she wiped her hands on her apron, white cotton blooming into a bruise of grease. And outside, on the town path, a boy with a pocket full of coins saying he's gonna leave one day. He didn't. He learned the names of every herring on the canal instead. The mills don't mourn, they hold. They hold the heat of every winter morning clocking, of the swallow nest echoes in the rafters, the last hum of the generator long after the power was cut. They rest, stone quiet, listening for hands to wake them, listening for the next clock brave enough to remember. I returned to the mill the next day with gloves, forceps, sample bags, everything I needed to feel like I was in control. I wasn't. The thread had moved. 12 hours earlier, it was snagged on a nail near the floor. Now it climbed the wall like ivy, or a vein it pulsed quickly. Not with light, with something deeper, something like intention. I reached out with the forceps with the same caution I'd approach a coiled snake, and the fiber wrapped itself around the metal. I felt a warmth through the glove, and then I wasn't in the mill anymore. I was standing in shallow water with sun on my shoulders and mud between my toes. A scream of laughter echoed like a flock of birds. Children running down a slope towards the river. They weren't speaking to me, they weren't aware of me. I tried to pull my hand back, I couldn't. The fiber tugged again and shift. I was flying down a steep street on a homemade go-kart with railway wheels, flagstones cracking beneath me. Someone screamed with triumph and shift. Rain on metal shutters, a mother handing her son a crisp £5 note that lasted all weekend and shift. The escalators at Pendle rise, shift. A room full of women sewing in the 1960s, hands moving fast, the language moving faster. We took each other under each other's wings and shift. Back in the mill. The fiber loosened from the forceps, rested against my palm like a living thing. This fabric wasn't absorbing memories, it was remembering them. It held them the way a stream holds light, and I felt suddenly, terrifyingly responsible. Here, the town hums. The bus at the interchange sighs open, letting out warm air and the smell of wet clothes. Kids hammer a football against the shutter that stutters and rattles like loose teeth. Rain halos the street lights like they're thinking about miracles. Oh, miracles. At the market, somebody laughs with their whole body, and you can feel it 3 stalls away. Bodies cluster under the canopies to escape the rain. And nothing here pretends to be anything than it is. Every shortcut leads to someone's cousin, and every hello comes with a follow-up question. And if the future ever forgets us, here will not. Because here, people don't just carry their own stories, they carry each other's. Like a flame kindled inside each other's hands. Each other's. each other's. At first, I tried to keep the fibre a secret, not because I wanted to possess it, but I was scared of what would happen if the world saw. Some things change when they're observed, and some things die under fluorescent lights. But I still visited the mill every day. Sometimes I didn't touch the thread at all, I just listened, and the fibre grew, slowly, first. Traced the brick like a crack, and then branched, and wove itself into structures too deliberately chance it. Began forming patterns, not random ones, maps, the cartography of memory, like roots etched across beams, footpaths looping around pillars, and only the ones who grew up here could look around at the weave and understand, oh, that's the Clayton Arms, that's the woods, that's the back of the Arndale. Quiet miracle. But miracles never stay. Miracle, quiet, miracle. One afternoon, I returned to the mill and there were these strange voices. Reporters, engineers, scientists, someone must have seen the glow through a cracked window and someone must have told someone else. The building was full of people with clipboards and hypotheses, and they walked past the fibre with measuring devices and laser pointers. They used words like unknown biopolymer, an unidentified synthetic structure, an emergent behavior. They didn't hear it. They didn't feel the warmth. They didn't understand that this wasn't a discovery, it was a relationship. Townspeople gathered outside yellow tape, watching strangers study what had quietly been part of them for decades. Nelson wasn't waiting to be discovered. Nelson was waiting to remember itself. The scientists took samples, and the fabric recoiled from its tweezers like a living nerve. So I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do. I spoke to it. Not out loud, my voice, I spoke to it with intention. I said, show me. Some fabric loosened from the rafters and came down and curled round my arm. It was low and warm. Person's future, not extracted, not exploited, not revitalized by outsiders, a town lit from the inside. I left the mill without a single sample because the scientists could measure its structure, but they couldn't feel its heartbeat. The mill opened its eyes, not to machines, but to gardens of light, panels, shimmer, where broken windows once were, catching the morning sun and feeding it back into the walls like photosynthesis. Threads run through the space, thin as spider silk, tense like harp strings they hum when someone enters the room. At the bus stop, a woman sells plants she propagated on a windowsill. Spider plants and cut down milk cartons, each labeled in biro, take one, bring it back when it makes babies. A man with paint under his nails tucks one into his rucksack and makes his way back to the robot that sits and organizes all its screws by shape and size without being asked. Up on the gantry, a young boy leans over the railing, watching the threads twitch each time he laughs under the vast spine of Pendle Hill. A town that didn't escape its past by tearing everything down, on the ground. A kid chalks a map on the pavement, drawing shortcuts through alleyways, linking back gardens and making Nelson smaller and bigger than it ever was. And the dust settled, the fibre stayed. It didn't want to be measured, it wanted to belong. For weeks, I visited the mill alone and the fibre grew slowly, rooting itself in quiet places. And then one morning, I found a thread outside, a small one, growing through a crack in the concrete near Nelson Interchange, and then another one beside the canal, and another one in the woods, and it was choosing its locations the way plants do: sunlight, water, safety, but also something else. It grew where people remembered, and word spread wildly but fast. The thread's back, there's a new growth near the reservoir. It reacts when you talk to it. People began visiting the mill not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. They shared stories and photos and objects from lost shops. And the residents began tending to the fibre the way you'd tend to a garden. They learned its seasons. They learned its need. They named this cultivated version Aetherloom, a living textile grown from air, light, and memory. Not manufactured, not mined, grown. People brought memories to the fibre, not to archive the past, but to carry it forward. And Aetherloom became cloth, garment, banner, home. A fabric that changes with emotion, that reveals the patterns of sunlight and that softens when held. Its garments weren't owned, they were stewarded, passed from person to person for weddings and for mournings and for new beginnings. And when Aetherloom was worn to holes, it wasn't thrown away. It was returned to the soil, so its memory could become nourishment for the land we stand on. And somehow, against all logic and against all industry, it all began here, in rooms like this, in the spaces people forgot about until the fabric remembered them back. I used to think I found the fibre, but the fibre found us, and it's ready to speak. I did not begin as fabric, I began as breath. Caught in the rafters of a mill and as laughter pressed into river stone. As stories that slipped between brick and bone because no one thought words could be absorbed by walls. But walls listen. And I remember everything you forgot you were remembering. The summer you biked to Pendle Hill, legs burning and mouth full of sky. The river where you swam with chicken feet swirling past, and somehow that was joy. I remember the shops that aren't here anymore, and the go-kart that shattered flagstones, and the first girl who held your hand behind Pendle Rhei. And your mother's voice, calling you home with the streetlights. Every fabric has its purpose, and mine is this: to hold you exactly as you were in the moment you felt free. You think you weave the memories, but I am weaving you. Thread by thread, you return to me. Your past isn't gone, it's archived in the warp and weft of every place you ever loved. And when the future arrives, shimmering, algorithmic, full of soft-spoken robots that know every street by heart, I'll still be here, remembering you into existence. I hold what the land holds, and I keep what the people keep. And I grow because you live. And every time you leave, you weave a thread behind, and we are all weaving threads behind tonight. So thank you for letting me remember you. To speak, to speak, to speak, to speak.